who gave his life as a ransom for many, for you. Amen. Well, it's summertime again. You would all agree with that statement. I am speaking the truth in love. It's summertime again. It's time, of course, for Hollywood to release their latest big budget movies. And this summer promises to be. It's poised to see movie theaters overflow with people probably standing in line waiting to see the latest action, adventure, blockbuster movie. And that's especially true when that movie maybe has to do with one of our favorite superheroes. I think there are a couple of superhero movies coming out this summer. And it doesn't matter if we've seen the same superhero in movie after movie after movie. We still go to the theater. We still stand in line. How many times have you seen Batman's story come to life on the big screen? Many times, right? I've personally seen 4 different actors play Batman. First, there was Michael Keaton, who was a great, awesome Batman. Then, of course, you had Val Kilmer coming along in 1995. He was an okay Batman. Next was George Clooney. George Clooney as Batman. Nobody really understood that one. Then there was Christian Bale, and he was probably the best of all the Batmans. Most recently, we've had Ben Affleck and Robert Pattinson. Both of them have taken their turns as the Cape Crusader. And it doesn't matter how many times we've seen these stories come to life, people will stand in line in order to see them. And it's not because we think that, well, this edition of this superhero's story is going to be different. No, the reason we go is because we know that it's going to be the same. We know exactly what we can expect. We know that there are going to be some explosions in the movie. There's going to be a lot of action. There's going to be a bit of humor. There's going to be some special effects. But most of all, there's going to be that moment in the movie where the villain seems to have the upper hand over our hero. The police are out of options. All of the normal people are freaking out, and it's up to our hero to step up and put himself on the line for our hero to get beaten within an inch of his life, to almost lose it all, only to come back and save it all. And that's what happens every single time, and we love it. And the reason we love it, I would argue, we love it because we love to see sacrifice. We love to see people putting all they have and all that they are on the line, almost lose it all, in order to come back and save everything. As baptized, forgiven, chosen followers of Jesus Christ, we've been called to a life of everyday heroism. Paul says that we have been called, you and I have been called, to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which we have been called. Jesus has called each one of us to join him in loving our neighbors, noticing who is needy and near to us, and then choosing to love that person no matter who they are, to love them more than we love ourselves. That's what we've been put here to do. That's what we've been saved to do. So Paul says, you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. So what is it that might be required of us? What will be required of us if we embrace that life of heroic love for people around us? Well, it would be the exact same thing that we go to the movies to see. Sacrifice. Now, you may not know this, you may not even believe this, but there are such things as superpowers in this world. In fact, I would argue that there is really only one true superpower, and everybody has it. You have it. I have it. The one true superpower in this world that everyone has is the willingness to sacrifice. Even if we lived in a world where people could fly, even if we lived in a world where Iron Man suits existed, even if we lived in a world where genetically altered human beings could crush things with their bare hands, even if we lived in that kind of a world, the only way anyone would ever be rescued is if the person with that power were willing to set aside their comfort, to set aside themselves, to risk their life and use it. Without sacrifice, no one ever gets saved. Without sacrifice, no one ever gets helped, which makes the willingness to sacrifice the ultimate superpower. And everyone has it. But just like in the comic books and Marvel Comics movies, there are some who choose to use their superpower for good, to sacrifice for the benefit of others. And there are some who choose to use their superpower for evil, to sacrifice only for themselves. Which one of those people are you? Jesus says, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. To serve and to give. He's talking to his disciples here about the calling. They're calling to be a servant, a sacrificial friend to others. And he uses himself as the supreme example. Sacrifice is the name of the game for Jesus. As God in the flesh, certainly Jesus had the power to calm the storms and to heal the sick, the lame, the blind, the deaf, in his two hands. And yet even Jesus says that the highest, the truest display of his strength was not when he did such things as feed 5,000 or raise people from the dead. No, the truest display of his strength, the reason he came down to earth, was to give his life as a sacrifice, a ransom, to cover over all of humanity's sin. The ultimate display of Christ's power was in his willingness to sacrifice, to lay down his life for many. Sacrifice is the ultimate superpower. And having been saved through Christ's sacrifice, we're then called to join him in a life of sacrifice, to be imitators, Paul says, heroes. So Paul proclaims to members of God's family, he says, be imitators of God as beloved children and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us. That's why you're here. He did it for you. You do that for others. We are imitators of Jesus. But here's what you and I know, and we know so very, very well. Doing this is way, way, way more difficult than it sounds. As I live my life, I see people who are far more sacrificial than I am. I see imitators of Jesus that I admire, people who seem to have sacrifice just oozing out of their pores, and all I've got is just a little bit eking out of my pinky finger. And if you're anything at all like me, you look at people like that, people that you admire, people who can give themselves more than you could ever give, people who can love way more than you could ever love. You look at those people and you say, whoa. How do you do that? I mean, I know I should, but I don't really want to. What do you know that I don't know? What has God's Spirit done in you that he hasn't yet done in me? What's the difference with me? Well, God gives us some answers to those questions this morning. In order to yield the superpower of sacrifice for the people in the world around you first, well, the Holy Spirit has to do some work in you. And one of the first things that the Holy Spirit is trying to do in you is to get you to a place where you are willing to reject an attitude of entitlement. Now, entitlement, of course, it's that belief that the world owes me something by default. I have a right. And we see it in politics all the time, don't we? People on the left, they argue that government assistance is a basic human right, and it should be there for people, even if it comes to at the cost of other people. On the right, people argue, look, I've worked for it, I've earned it, I should get to keep it, it's mine to do with whatever I please. And even though these two sides passionately point fingers at one another, what fails to get realized among them is that they're using the same argument. An argument of entitlement. An argument that says, I got to get mine. Whether you think I earned it or I should get it as a right, it all comes down to entitlement. It's mine. Now contrast that attitude with what Paul says to the Christians in Philippi. He says, in humility count others. Others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to your own interests, but to the interests of others. Have this mind among yourselves, Paul says, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the very form of God, did not count equality with God something to be grasped, but he made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant. We live in a world where the inclination is to protect and to grow our own interests. But Paul uses words that grab us by the shoulders and turn us in the opposite direction. He says, I don't care what the attitude of the world is. You are a baptized, forgiven, beloved child of God. We don't live for ourselves, which would be entitlement. No, instead we offer ourselves, which is sacrifice, for the good of others. And we do that because that's what Christ has done for us. Reject an attitude of entitlement. I'm not entitled to anything. Everything is a gift. Have you ever tried to give someone a hug when your arms are full? Maybe you've come home from the grocery store and your arms are full of grocery bags, and you push through the door and you walk in to find your spouse standing there, and she comes up to you completely blind to the fact that your arms are full of stuff, and she just wants to give you a hug right then and there. And you don't want to put these bags down because it's summertime and you're sweaty and you stink, and so you don't want to give her a hug, right? But she doesn't seem to realize, she's kind of blind to the fact that you're just a horrible mess because of the heat. But she just walks right up to you. All she wants is a hug from you, and she tries to hug you, but all you're able to do is sort of kind of give her a chin hug. You know, love you too, honey. Not much of a hug, is it? It's not much of a hug because your arms are full. That's how a lot of us treat our neighbors. We want to help them. We want to love them. But we want to really, really keep our arms full of all of the things that we feel like we're entitled to. You know, the comfort level that we're comfortable with. The amount of money that we have in the bank that we feel like we deserve, the amount of free time that we think should be ours. And so we hold on to all of those things, even though God has given us an opportunity to love and to bless somebody else. And when we do that, when we hold on to all of those things, all that we're left to be able to give them is kind of our chin. Maybe it's impossible to have an entitled mindset and a sacrificial mindset at the same time. Maybe it's one or the other. And maybe what a Christ-like hero understands is that our obligation to be a blessing to others trumps any entitlement we have to our own blessings. Maybe what a Christ-like hero understands is that, well, to be a sacrificial, heroic neighbor, we know that sometimes in order to give somebody a hug, well, we got to empty our own arms. Followers of Jesus are sacrificial when they empty their arms and reject an attitude of entitlement. A second thing I've learned is that in order to wield this superpower of sacrifice, you have to run from the temptation of overthinking the outcome. So often, when we get this opportunity to help somebody else out, we sort of get trapped in this process of psyching ourselves out because we start thinking of all of the things that could go wrong, all of the potential things that could go wrong. And before we know it, we're not jumping in, rather we're backing up and buried in our own interests. So Jesus says this to his disciples, to you and to me. In John chapter 15, he says, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lays down his life for his friends. So Jesus is talking with the 12 again, and he tells them exactly where a life of sacrifice is going to lead him eventually, and where it may very well lead them also to death. He says, look, as my disciples, I want you to bear fruit. And my fruit is love, and there's no greater form of love than being willing to give your life for the people that you call your friends. But that's not all. He also says, the reason that I'm telling you this, the reason that I'm telling you that you should follow me in this life of sacrificial love for the neighbor, even though it may lead to your demise, is because I want your joy to be full. I want you to have joy. What? Yeah, I want you to follow me in this road of sacrifice, even if it might lead to your death, so that you might have joy. Now that only makes sense if it's understood in a particular way, because death ain't fun, right? So maybe Jesus means this. Perhaps he's saying there is fuller joy to be had in the act of sacrificially following him than in any particular outcome of sacrificially following him. There's more joy in the journey of obedience than in any particular outcome of obedience, because obedience, that's in your hand. The outcome is in God's hands. So don't overthink it. Several years ago, I can't remember how long ago it was now, but my oldest son decided that he wanted to skydive. Now, when it comes to skydiving, there are two types of people: those who will and those who won't. And both of these types of people, they make really compelling arguments. Those who won't skydive, and that includes yours truly, have a really, really good point. And that point is, of course, well, you just might die. I mean, you're jumping out of an airplane, and if it's a tandem jump like we see here in this picture, you're jumping out with someone that's strapped on your back, and you hope and pray that person knows what they're doing. There's a chance that you could die. That's a good point. But the person who is willing to jump makes a really good point as well, that they might say, yeah, I might die, but the experience of getting to see things that few people in the world ever get to see, the experience of having a perspective that I've never had before, the experience of having not only the wind rush through my face, but life rush through my veins in a way that hasn't happened before, that might just be worth the journey. If sacrificially loving your neighbor were skydiving, Jesus would jump every time. He would jump out of the plane at every opportunity, and he would look back at you as his disciple, and he would say, follow me. Follow me. You might die, but I'm asking you to jump so that your joy may be full, because on the way down, you will be changed. Maybe that's what he's saying. When God gives us an opportunity where sacrifice is required to love your neighbor, if you focus solely on the bad things that could happen, chances are you're not going to do it. A sacrificial hero refuses to overthink the outcome because they know that the joy is in the obedience. One final thing that I've learned in reading the scriptures and in seeing God's Spirit working in and through other people up to huge levels of sacrifice is this. What drives and enables these heroes to sacrifice their time and their comfort and the energy and the money out of their hands that it takes to love someone in a particular moment is not simply that they reject this attitude of entitlement or that they know that there is joy in the obedience, but they know that the same God who put all of these things in their hands that they have to give up, well, he has an endless supply in his hands. A hero understands that there is an endless supply, that they know that as they empty their hands of the things that they might feel entitled to, Jesus has an endless supply of those same things in his hands. So Jesus says, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. As we abide in Jesus, ask whatever you wish, and he will do it. Now, please understand that the context here is sacrifice, deep sacrifice. Jesus isn't saying ask for a Ferrari, a bigger house, and $1 million in the bank. No, that's not the meaning of his words here. Jesus is saying that as we abide in him, and he says that abiding in him is keeping his commandments, as we keep our focus on what it means to be obedient to Jesus, as we walk down paths of sacrifice, because that's where abiding in Jesus is going to lead you. As you walk that road of sacrifice, God will meet your needs, whatever that need might be. He will ask you to empty your arms, but know this, he can fill them back up again. 6-year-old boy walks into Lowe's with his mom on a Saturday morning to buy his dad a birthday gift, and she pulls a $20 bill out of her purse, and she hands it to him and says, all right, this $20 bill is for you. You use this to buy your dad something for his birthday. And immediately this 6-year-old boy has a crisis on his hand. I mean, there are two choices in front of him, right? Part of him says, awesome. I'm going to buy my dad something really, really cool this year. But another part of him says, he wants to say to Mom, you are crazy. This is the most money that I have ever seen in my life. Let's just make him a card and call it good. I'm saving for a bike. And of course, that's what he wants to do. And what that part of the little boy doesn't yet understand is that that $20 bill that he holds in his hand is not the only $20 bill in his mom's purse. But the only way that he will ever experience her extravagant riches is by being obedient to what's been entrusted to him. Little does he know, as he empties his hand and sacrifices, she has the ability to fill it back up again and again. As you take serious this call of Jesus to will, this superpower of sacrifice for other people, it will press on your comfort, the comfort that Jesus has given you in this life. But Jesus has more. As you take serious this call to be a blessing to other people, it will mess with your wallet and your bank account that God has blessed you with. But guess what? Jesus has more. If you take serious this call to love other people sacrificially, sometimes till it hurts, maybe even to death, if you lose the life that God has given you, guess what? Jesus has another life waiting for you. And you can hoard all of these things and protect all of these things, but you will never find out that God can constantly fill your hands with those things. A hero who loves his neighbor knows God has an endless supply. Now, if all of these promises of Jesus are true, if it's true that I'm not entitled to anything, but I'm sacrificial and God's going to make sure that I have all that I need, if it's true that joy is in the obedience and not necessarily in the outcome, if it's true that even if I give myself till it hurts and I lose my life, that Jesus has another life waiting for me, if all of the promises of Jesus are true, then as he says, come follow me, and giving everything I have and all that I am with what he says is important. It's not so much sacrificial as it is smart. That's why those who understand this and embrace this don't have to be dragged into this. They just kind of stand at the ready. A hero stands at the ready. I mean, Clark Kent, he never had to be dragged into the phone booth, did he? Batman was never accused of purposefully ignoring the bat signal because they saw service as a privilege. They didn't see it as a sacrifice. And that brings me to the big question for us today, for us as children of light to wrestle with today. What's your attitude toward the superpower of sacrifice? Do you go through life with your head down, just focused on what you got to do for yourself? You have to be dragged, kicking and screaming into anything that hints of sacrifice? Or Do you go through life with your head up, looking for opportunities to heroically love your neighbor, and as a result, you stand at the ready? Which one of these two people do you tend to be? Which one of these two people do you desire to be? You have the superpower of sacrifice. You really, really do. The question is whether you're going to use it to serve others or to serve yourself. So don't settle for paying your money to watch other people be sacrificial. Live it yourself. And you will get opportunities to do so this week, maybe even today. Big opportunities, small opportunities. But to take it will require that you reject an attitude of entitlement. It will require that you trust that there's more joy in the obedience than in any particular outcome, that you trust that there's more to